Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you today. And I happen to want to remind you all that this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute working with a licensed mental health professional in your area. Please seek one out to work on your unique issues. And just be in mind that even though we're in this age and we want to be with our people, sometimes you got to do the digital to be able to get the help too. So we have a returning guest here. So we might have to actually skip the bio section, which I usually read for that, because I know some changes have happened for this individual too. But we're going to be talking much more about the work they've been doing, the new project they have, as well as just more things that we're seeing as we move forward further into this 21st century. So today we're going to have Steve Sawyer back on here, who is a licensed clinical counselor, if I remember correctly. Social worker. Yep, licensed clinical social worker, and has been working with their new project, which is the Digging Roots of Trauma and Developmental Trauma, which is also connected with Brainspotting. But less about me, more about Steve. Welcome back, Steve.
Thank you for having me, Perry. I just love being able to, anytime we get time together, I love it. And, the beauty of working together, right now with the mental health crisis, that's where we're at. We have to work together, and in that, the suffering that's in this world is big for everyone, in their households, the grief, the loss, the anxiety, the trauma,
Very much so. And especially, I don't know if you've seen, because I know I posted on mine, was the NPR article talking about why therapists are leaving insurance. And
we can go deep on that one.
Oh, yeah. Well, the deeper realities of that system, which I think also gets into some of what you've experienced with working with Western mental health systems and part of how it's maybe on some level. And again, I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but I'm putting my own personal spin on this. Part of why the mental health crisis is going on.
It really is. When you look at, thousands of years of wisdom and understanding, there were people that were designated within, all of the tribes, all the nations that were in position to help people in crisis, right? They were put in a place to support, on demand, and so that they could meet the nervous system where it was at. And, this colonized mental health system is such that, when you really sit down and dig into it, that it's controlled. And, and it's controlled by authorities, funding sources, and it really damages the outcome for people not getting complete healing. When a person wasn't dictated by time or an authority, they were able to attune to people at a different level, right? They were able to sit in that space with them and calm their nervous system, when we, digging roots, when we look at developmental trauma, stress states, PTSD, and even anxiety response, right? The true healing capacity of one human sitting with another, it operated from a place of timelessness. It operated from a place of heart to heart. And all of these things get in the way of being able to do that when these clinicians are forced to work in a space, a 50-minute session,
Right.
They're constantly watching the time, so they can't even get fully in their heart sometimes with the clients that are right there in front of them. And when that happens, people don't get all the way well, right? They're caught in a trap of having to return, which is, part of, capitalism, having to return to get things fixed, and,
Right.
and in that we do the best we can, right? Everybody is doing the best that they can. The clinicians that are operating or trying to, in our mental health crisis and therapy world, are doing the best they can for everybody. But there are other ways to work too,
Mm-hmm.
There are other higher wisdoms of what's going on when people are in stress that, that's even controlled by these mental health systems. I think about the book Saving Normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not pulling his name right now, but it was really transformative for me to know the people that were behind the DSM diagnosis manuals to diagnose people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it was when he was contributing and writing that doctor, he didn't want, they never even, like, half of that DSM committee didn't even um they didn't even know what they were creating. That's why he called it Saving Normal, right? They because he wrote that book after he kind of withdrew from all of the processes of the DSM when he saw how it was being utilized and structured and
Mm-hmm.
controlled, and then ultimately, being controlled by by the mental health system and insurance companies, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned that you talked about how people are moving away from insurance because there's so much crisis. And when you're dictated and controlled for your time with your client when you're sitting there, right? And they give you, sometimes 4 sessions now. They used to give you a solid 8,
Right.
like these things that are going on like that, man, they have to move on and go to the next crisis that's in front of them. And it becomes crisis management and not healing,
Correct.
So yeah, and there's a lot going on with that, and in that, full mental health conglomerates that are then captivating upon the dollar amounts that are associated with this crisis, and we look at
Right.
that, we look at big pharma, and we see what they're doing, medicating symptoms. And
Mm-hmm.
again, medication has its place in crisis, but it's meant to symptom manage. And, the modern, medicinal quality of these things are used to manage what's going on. And again, it doesn't get to the fullest healing. So people are using medication and the mental health system to survive.
Mm-hmm.
But completion of healing evades them, right? And
Right. Well, there's the simple fact of the matter is, and it has been said in certain other points, that much of our Western mental health system is about setting you up to cope, not to actually resolve the issue for which you're coping for, so that you
absolutely.
continue to be functional. And again, there's, as much as we also look at the aspects of, as you mentioned, the control of factors, there's also what are the, so we say, social structures that go hand in hand with that. The idea that you just need to get a worker back on the assembly line is more important than actually, is this worker going to be able to be safe around his family, safe in their society, going to live a long, happy life? No, because they're a replacement cog.
Exactly. And so then we have, the medical system and the mental health system with all of these people that are trying to serve their community and their clients, but then they get burned out.
Mm-hmm.
That's tied into their day-to-day life survival to pay their bills, right? To feed their families,
Mm-hmm.
to pay their mortgage, and they have to forego. And then you have, in a way, right? You have wounded healers that are sitting with people that, also can't attune through their heart,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
like, Mia Chante, to be with your heart, to be in your heart when you're sitting with people that are there with broken hearts, right?
Right.
And, and in that, when people have that space within them, they're again doing the best that they can to really help the crisis that's in front of them in that moment, but their ability to be fully present in the moment. That's one reason I'm such a fan of HeartMath's work.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you that aren't familiar with the Institute of HeartMath, the science behind that is proving and has been known for thousands of years, right?
Right.
That the heart is our electrical epicenter of the body, and our electricity, from being shared from one person to another is a gift, and in that, to come back to our heart, even for those of you that are listening that are clinicians, when you're sitting with somebody who's in crisis in front of you, to be able to come to your heart, work from your heart, serve from your heart. A lot of the solutions that are being given, even for our people that are burning out, are cognitive in nature.
Right.
And one of our elders actually talks about the longest journey is from your head to your heart, and getting out of this thinking world. And that's that transitions us right to brain spotting, which me and you are very passionate about, and being present with somebody and getting out of these cognitive interventions and getting into our heart and talking from person to person, working from our heart and from one nervous system to another. There are things out there, even in brain spotting world, like we both know of, that are gimmicky and stuff like that. And when David founded and discovered brain spotting, he built a model of sitting with somebody quietly as they found peace within their own nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, and this is something I talk about in all of my lectures, the trainings, addictions work, all the stuff that I do, and I train on, of being able to be in this place of an attunement with one person to another, and not in our own heads. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the educational system and how it works, right? Like the educational system, along with the capitalized incomplete models, people have to like stumble their way to working. Everybody comes in to serve their clients and help the world around them. They go into their masters in social work, their masters in in counseling, their PhDs, their MDs, right?
Mm-hmm.
They come into it for their love of the people that are around them, and then they're trained out of it. I think about, I was treating a young man in Wisconsin many years ago, and I was sitting with him, and we were really getting close to releasing that trauma from his body. And man, every time he came in, I could feel that medication that was symptom management, because the reality was he's reacting and blowing up in his household and angry at the world. And I always teach, right? Anger is a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
It's a symptom of hurt, right? Or fear,
Mm-hmm.
one or the other. And we're trying to get the deepest access to this hurt that lives within him, in his heart.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so medicated that we couldn't even get there, right? The utilizing of medication was blocking him from getting to his healing.
Right.
And again, his doctor was doing what he had told me. I got so angry with this doctor that I went back to my supervisor. I said, "That's it. I had everything in line to go to medical school."
Right.
And he said, "Steve, you're not going to survive medical school, or they're not going to survive you." And it in that, to come back to like sitting with people and being in our heart, right? Being with them, and then being able to feel that. Even for the doctors that listen to this podcast somewhere down the line, I'm sure some will. When being able to understand our medications is one of our toolbox, and to work together. That's the theme of it right here, right? To work together with the mental health providers that are seeing the actual symptoms, right? The families, the mental health provider, not being the expert at the table and controlling everything that's going on, but to hear from the family what the attribute, the integration of all of this, right? In a word, integration and community, sharing the power, right? Sharing the wisdom that's amongst and right in front of us. You know, we're trained and controlled right past that.
Right, which goes into a lot of the history of Western world, and especially Western's like Europe, in the standpoint of the whole idea of the dichotomy and separation between heart and mind, the whole idea of rationalism and what also is referred to as the king brain, which, while it has built some things, it has actually destroyed a whole number of other things. And just the entire idea that all of these things can sit in their own separate silo and they never have to actually interact with each other. I mean, yeah, you might have to look. Yeah.
In our wilderness therapy program, right? Like, we're there to meet the crisis right there in that moment. But here they had a clinician at home that'd been working with the family sometimes 5-10 years. And they weren't even allowed sometimes the time and the respect, right, of the work that had been done to that point. And this comes back to that our egos, right? Like our egos of my model works better than yours. When they all work together, right? I talk about these different therapeutic models. You've been in the trainings that I do around like IFS and all these other kinds of models, and they all work together. It's about how fluidly they all flow together, and that person, and this is what happens for clients that have had a lot of treatment, right? And aren't getting all the way healed, is then they sit down in front of the next person, trying again, right? Their heart is at the chair again. And they're in a new office with a new clinical model, a new doctor, whatever that is. And then we just erased like none of that mattered, you know? When the kids come into our treatment program, they would have this narrative. They would have this narrative that they'd have this narrative inside of them that didn't work, right? And the clinician sitting in front of them, that didn't work. And so what I always did with our young people when they were in our treatment programs was I would have them sit down, and instead of just saying it not worked, and this was always a step in that because they were often angry, right? There'd be something between them and that provider. They left them because they were angry or whatever. I said, what worked for you? What did they teach you? What was their understanding, their wisdom that they gifted you with that did work? And then let's build upon that. Right? It's like building a house, the foundation of the house. What was the foundation that got you here? And this goes back to what you hear me talk about all the time, right? That inside of them, and this is for all of you listening, where the trauma, the stress, the anxiety, the depression lives, right? There's a foundation underneath their resilience. Somehow they're sitting in that chair again. You're not broken, right? They're not broken when they sit in front of you when you're a clinician, a doctor, whoever you are, they're not broken. What brought them to that chair? Their own resilience, right? And that's where my tagline on my website, Steve Sawyer, LCSW.net, is where trauma exists, resilience is lurking, right? That's an even deeper thought, right? Which is where the depression is sitting right in front of us, the resilience is lurking. That's where brain spotting and how it works neurobiology wise, right? We sit with them with our heart, with our mouth closed. We get in our heart and they find their medicine within. They find what inside of the trauma they went through, the addiction they went through, the depression bout, the suicide, worked with all of that. What inside of them kept them alive and puts in front of me again. And they find it, and that lasts. That doesn't just last for a little while. It lasts forever. You can't, when it's discovered by the midbrain, when the trauma clears out enough in that midbrain enough that the whole story reveals itself. You know, when we sit, you know, I've had conversations, you know, me and David sat with Stephen Porges and had this conversation about it, right?
So when you say David, let's be full names so people.
Yeah, thank you. You got to stop me and say, hey, Steve, David Grand, the founder of Brainspotting. He has a book. It's available on Amazon. It's on audiobook for those of you that are neurodivergent like me. And you listen to that because what he discovered was a way of harnessing and working with the neurobiology that's different than every single model out there. And if you want to have that conversation, come to one of my talks about brain spotting, and I can explain the difference of things like eyes moving versus still, right? What happens when we talk to our client when they're in deep access to their inner neurophysiology. I can talk to you about the periaqueductal gray that needs to create movement for this trauma to move on. And brain spotting harnesses it precisely. And even inside of our brain spotting world, people are always trying to make it better when simple, right? I always think, I don't know, but keep it simple, right? KISS.
Yeah. But that's also one of the aspects too of probably, again, the Western thinking is that somehow it's got to be made better. Somehow we've got to prove that this is the shit, as opposed to it is one of amongst many.
That's right. And inside of that, right, like being able to drop out of our ego space and be in our heart, right? The ego lives when we're looking at the outside world, right? We're looking at the outside world and it's actually a trauma response. Right? Because we're dealing with a hierarchical thinking of power. I'm going to try to be better than that person, that other therapist over there. My model is better than that model over there. And then when that happens, right, we stop the healing mechanism. Which
stops the mechanism, which again is still inbuilt in this idea of the philosophy and thinking and structures that came out of the Western world.
Yes, a conquering mentality, right? It began in the United States, right? The conquering mentality, and this is human history throughout time. We go back to Roman times, right? We go into different religious processes of conquering. And it's based in our trauma gaining power and control response in the moment, right? And so we want more resources, so we're going to conquer that tribe. We want more resources, so we're going to conquer that land. We want more resources, so we're going to conquer each other, even inside of our own people. When I lecture on lateral violence, I have a lecture. It's in my Indigenous Focus page. I don't have a recording of that one in there, but it's a training and a presentation that talks about, especially in our Native communities, how one ups each other and how that kind of plays out. And that was embedded in our epigenetics. That was embedded into our neurobiology through the historical trauma process. And that's, our communities are healing, right? Some of them are healing and some of them are still stuck in that. We have it, and it lives everywhere. It lives in spiritual communities. It lives and I always think about the person from kind of four areas, right? We have our emotional world, our mental world, our physical world, and we have our spiritual world. And this conquering can live in any of those four areas, right? And so, that attack and conquer,
right?
It's and this goes back. It goes back to us being we actually have epigenetics. I was just talking with an elder yesterday of the epigenetics of humans and animals, and conquering mentality there, versus being connected, to be truly connected with each other. And then conquering, we see that in a lot of different forms in human nature right now. Conquering for water, conquering for oil, conquering for whatever resource it is that we need to try to survive, right?
Right.
And that's natural. That's natural. You look at a wolf pack, right? They'll move into a territory and an area where there's more elk, and they'll try to push everybody out of their way, and that's just natural. That's just natural survival capacity. And humans, though, we got this big thinker up here, our big frontal lobes part of our brain. And in that, then we start thinking about how to conquer. So there's that mental side, right?
Right.
The emotional side comes up when we get upset with somebody. Like I gotta go into fight response and take you out. In the mental capacity, we start thinking and planning and strategizing. When we look at the body, we start preparing for battle, and that's the fight, flight, freeze responses, mostly fight in that particular thing that we're talking about. And then even spiritual.
And I do need to and I've point out to some other people, and this is again another Western influence. Fight actually comes last. It's more freeze and flee first. But because of the language rules about alphabetizing everything that starts with the first letter, so everything starts with an F. So you're going to alphabetize based off that second letter. Which letter comes first? Fight's going to come first. And we've all been programmed through the education to put that list together and even think about that list as, oh, fight's the first thing. No, fight's the last thing.
Yes. When you're going to, so a species they'll try to avoid a fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's survival. Just stay away from that over there. I don't want to have nothing to do with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first stress response is to avoid, right? To fight.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we're backed in a corner, when a bear is backed in a corner, even a bear, I've walked with the bears in Alaska all around me while fishing salmon. If you back one in a corner, now, right, that fight comes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we can't use any of it, right? We can't use any of it. The frontal lobes in the brain lock. I think about who does a good writing on this. It's in the beginning. My wife trains for the trauma center of it's the Center for Embodiment. Carrie Sawyer is my wife. Bessel, back when he was a part of that organization, he did a writing in a book called Overcoming Trauma Through Yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody hears yoga and then they already go into flight. They're like, no way, I can't do that, right? They studied that really carefully. The Trauma Center for Embodiment learned it a hard way when they tried yoga classes with people.
Mm-hmm.
And we had kids would run from the word yoga because going towards their body, that body keeps the score that Bessel's book is about, right? They would want to run from that. And so when they started doing this yoga, they discovered this flight response quite significantly, and they studied it to figure out what was going on. But anyways, we digress a little bit. In Overcoming Trauma Through Yoga, Bessel has a very poignant writing in there in one of the paragraphs where he talks about freeze response. It's the best writing I found on it. There's more people writing about it now. We're kind of old key now. We're old. But in that, he talks about the cognitive lock, right? So, so in that, right, when everything doesn't work, I can't run away. I can't fight myself out of the corner. Then the system either collapses and goes into dorsal vagal response, which is giving in, submitting to death. It works really good for tricking predators because they think, you gave up, and then all of a sudden they let you go and you could take off on your flight response again.
Right. The possum is an example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great example. Yeah, the possum is a perfect example of that. But when the cognitive lock is a process. In Brainspotting, we talk about the activation arc. I teach the other, which is the dorsal vagal arc. In there, the stage before the body submits to death is, I don't know what to do. Which way do I go? I have a picture I use in all my trainings of two cheetahs on each side of the gazelle. and the that those two cheetahs are so the threats on both sides. I can't escape, and the brain locks. But that you can see that gazelle, he's standing like completely still, right, locked up, like frozen, and that's freeze response, right? And if one of them grabbed him, and I have this picture that I shared in all my trainings, if one grabs that gazelle, the body goes completely limp. Now I'm done, right? And sometimes that in that picture progression I show in that training, and I use it in a lot of my trainings. The progression then from that is to kind of fall still. Predator is pulling that gazelle away. That's my addiction model, cut from the herd. You're now being dragged away from the herd. You're being dragged away from the herd, and then they drop you, right? And the rest of the cheetahs are around, the family, all the cubs come running up, and all of a sudden that gazelle is laying there and just jumps up and takes off. Last ditch effort is dorsal response. And that manifests in our human beings with this incredible depression that's going on right now. People have giving up, lose hope, right? And depression's even a stage before that. Suicidality kind of falls in there. But there's another one that's really important for all you that are listening that sits back by the fight response I talk about this a lot in developmental trauma of how do we make...
Which we're going to hit in the second half and have you do more define to that, but keep going.
Yeah. So you feel free to let me know when that break comes. Is how do I make the threat in front of me? This is different than fawning response. So we'll pull that apart. We have appeasement, and then we have fawning. And appeasement in that process of that threat in front of me. So if you grew up in an abusive household, or a very angry parent, for example, how do I make you feel better right now so you don't take this out on me? And I take on the responsibility. I lecture about how this turns into shame, but this is how shame is actually born into the nervous system. And I have those slides I share that show that. But the appeasement structure is, how do I make this threat in front of me okay with me right now? And we basically camouflage, right? We basically camouflage in that moment. You look at this in an alcoholic household here, dad comes home and he's, if he's drunk, he might beat me up, but yet I'll go and get him a beer from the fridge, right? That's different than codependency, though, for those of you that are listening. Codependency, is fawning response. And fawning response, when we actually feel a loving connection to somebody and we step into it, and I have a picture I use for fawning response where that little doe is standing there, and behind her is the little fawn, and that fawn is kind of hiding behind the parent. And if I stay close to you, you'll keep me safe. So this is how people are dependent. They'll stay in alcoholic relationships, abusive relationships, etc.
Right. Because I think this is also a very good place for us to start that wrapping up for the section. But some thoughts that come to mind that I think, again, to be aware of, and I'm going to start from that fawning. There was a recent movie that came out called The Quiet Place Day One, which is a horror movie and so forth, and about monsters that go after sound. And so I was listening to an author who was breaking that. Who was looking at the world building of this place and pointed out that it's a good movie in world building because by the time you start seeing who's surviving, it's not a lot of young children and parents. Because what is a young child going to do? It's going to scream. Monster gets that. What is the frightened parent worrying about that child going to do? Scream for that child. Monster gets them. So that standpoint of just how much that is a programmed response as a species, and something that we don't think about, because I think it leads into the other thought that has come up, because I know one of the things, some of the news articles I've been watching is talking about the global problem of population growth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how so much of the West is having declining populations.
Yeah.
And coming back to this sense of the depression, the freeze, the need to fight, how much of that energy is not going to be allowed by nature to go into procreation?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in that, right, that's when all these competitions for resources kind of show themselves, right? And
Right.
And we worked with a lot of adoptees. My grandmother was an adoptee, and being separated from birth. From We know that that attachment begins at 21 days post conception, and and that bond is for 8 months. The internal, they can recognize, a fetus can recognize mom's voice at 21 days. I do that when I do lectures on adoption or kind of child welfare separation issues. And there's a book out there, Primal Scream. It's fairly controversial in the adoption world because it hits so freaking hard. when people read that book, man, it hits hard,
Well, it hits against the standpoint of the idea, the, again, cognitive rational thing that you can have this other child go here, and yeah, they might get love and so forth, but there might not be that emotional connection that needs to happen with them. Logically, it says yes, but
in that, we have adoptive parents that are often aren't healed right all the way, etc. Trying to contain this scream. And boy, this is when we work with things that so-called diagnosis, I reterm it, but the diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder. It's reactive to attachment. I'm scared to connect after I lost my primary biological caregiver, right? And here's the thing. That's adoptees, but many people, from their lack of connection, this comes back to some of our teachings, lack of connection to the earth, and their fear and loss and grief of what they're seeing right in front of them right now. Every day news, another broadcast of fear around our planet, our existence. Inside of that, they see this this happening, and they're breaking their connection with what brought us to be and the connection to the earth, and then they live with a primal scream. So people are running around with this neurological dysregulation. They don't understand it. It lives inside of them. They can't sit still. They label it ADHD, anxiety response, depression, all these things fall in that category. It's living inside of them, right? And they haven't found the antidote inside of themselves yet. That's going back to that, it has to come from within for anything to last. For us to heal, the medicine, the healing, the neurobiology has to come from within to calm that. And that takes us all the way back to digging roots, brain spotting again,
So I'm going to pause you there because we're going to take the break so that in our second half, we can definitely be talking about the digging roots.
Let's go there. I look forward to it.
All right. So this is Steve Sawyer, licensed clinical social worker. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Stay tuned for the second half. We will definitely be talking much more about digging roots and getting into that. So stay tuned, folks.
Want to see what Voice America is up to behind the scenes? Follow us on TikTok at Voice America Talk Radio.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Live up to your full potential. You've heard that for years, but now there's a channel to help you get there. Introducing the Voice America Empowerment Channel. Get motivated, hear about success stories, and positive encouragement. The Voice America Empowerment Channel is the home of the world's top life coaches. entrepreneurs, and success experts. Listen to the Voice America Empowerment Channel. It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed. Success starts here. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com. It's your world.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with licensed clinical social worker Steve Sawyers. And as you've been listening to us talk beforehand, we've sort of setting a lot of the ground materials and things for you to think about as we talk about the Digging Roots developmental trauma model. Now, I've done the first level of this, and this was like I think a year ago, when you were doing the tour and you came up to Sacramento. So I drove up for that. So tell us more about Digging Roots as you now have more time to focus on this particular project.
Yeah, you betcha. Yeah. Well, we're in a transition. It's so funny how things like this move, right? Digging roots, right? So this is like below the surface, right? It's below the surface. This human stress response we've been talking about. And it lives a lot from developmental trauma, right? When you think about a human being, from how they're brought from, even, in utero all the way through, getting access to even, people hearing their parents fighting when they're in utero is fascinating work, But when we look at this overall human capacity and what's going on in the world, root issue underneath. So I did Digging Roots brain spotting. First time I tried to cram it into one day, split it half brain spotters and half mental health therapists from the community to just teach about how this lives in our roots of the nervous system. And that was one day. Then it went to 2 days. Now it's basically 4 days with an online course. But that online course, no matter what model people use, it helps people understand the roots in the nervous system, right, of developmental trauma. At that neurological level. And so, in that kind of deeper space of that, it's an offer to everyone. We're actually rebuilding the entire pre-course that we were using for Digging Roots brain spotting to be for the community. It's going to be a teachable that any clinician can take at any given time. Let me restate that. Any person at any given time that wants to understand developmental trauma from the root level can go on and do that teachable, and they're going to understand things at a neurological, human fundamental level, right? Of how this stuff gets trapped in our nervous system. And so I want that, and I'm building it to be available to the general public, right? So you can go on there. They've had developmental trauma. They grew up in an abusive household or whatever, that they can go on there and hear their story. I'm working on another website right now called Hope Shot, and Hope Shot is about ending trauma's aloneness. Right? When me and Dr. Gabor Mate did some work together, we had this conversation afterwards, and we did 6 panels across the country. One of them's on YouTube on my website. I think it's New Vision Wilderness host Gabor Mate. Me and him did a panel there. We did 6 of those across the country. That all trauma lives in aloneness, and that goes back to the roots, right? So the root human existence of being disconnected from our parents, our mother, our father, human nature of disconnected from the earth. That's why our native people call grandmother or mother, Unchimaka, or father, the son. And so in that, that's basic kind of thinking, right? But inside of that, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but because what is also making me spark on is also the report from the Surgeon General about chronic loneliness as being an issue in America, especially following the pandemic. But at the core of this, loneliness, as you said, people would rather ideally be alone to avoid being caught up in trauma.
Yeah. So one of the that I use all the time, right? It's not about changing what happened. It's changing how it lives within us. This goes back to roots, right? So digging roots, going into the depths, right, of how it lives within us. And so dysregulation, research was very clear. The unseen wounds study, which is fairly old now, and there's other variations of it, where nowhere is safe. My friend Joseph Spinazzola did a lot of those studies. He captured in those studies, and the where nowhere was safe was written with him, but the National Childhood Traumatic Stress Network did the one that that was really focused in on the dysregulation. There were 6 forms of dysregulation that were born of it. We talk about that in Digging Roots, and each one down. But how it lives within us, it really comes in 6 forms. And it manifests in relationship dysregulation. It manifests in dysregulation towards our sense of self, right? Dysregulation of attentional dysregulation of the world around us, which is associated with hypervigilance stress response. So check around us to see if we're safe. That's 3 of them. But going to digging roots, right? Knowledge, right? That this is how it lives within us is the first stage, right? It's the first stage is to have the knowledge, right? That it lives within me and this is how it's living, because we do these things and we just think it's us because it's a compromised sense of self, right? So so in that we get this knowledge, it lives inside of us. That's why I'm doing that Digging Roots to be general public first and foremost, because the gateway to healing first and foremost is to understand it lives within us. We're not and in that it comes from trauma stress response. We're not faulty. You're not broken. For those of you that have trauma in your life, you are not broken, right? Inside of that, I see that all the time. People come in with this narrative, man, young people, everything. I'm unfixable. I'm unhealable, right? And for you mental health clinicians and those clients sit inside of you, that's the fundamental self-dysregulation. And so in that, we can get access to that now. This is where Digging Roots Brainspotting comes in. Brainspotting by itself often gets access to it. But when we accompany and build together, right, the model of the neurophysiology model of Brainspotting and the higher wisdom that's within that model, eyes still, sitting with each other with our hearts open and steadied, and then connection to the body where it lives within. This stuff moves fast, really fast. I had a guy who was in one of our native conferences and one of our workshops. I didn't even do it, right? I just set up little dyads of 10 people. It was a total of 20 people that were allowed in that workshop. I was doing this, the White Bison, who I'm a trainer for, a native recovery focused organization, an uncolonized one, had me do these workshops with 10 these groups, and 20 people were sitting in dyads. And one guy came into then was fascinated by it and showed up in a training I did in California not too long ago, along with Regina, who I co-train a lot in our native community, with native focused brain spotting. He stood up in front of the whole group and said, I don't know what this is, but within 10 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever long that I was sitting with that guy in front of me, and how Steve set up that neurophysiology with all of us as a group, it released, right? And he's like, that was just brain spotting in its fundamental form, right? And then it's a layer below that lives in the roots, and that's the digging roots brain spotting work. And that's how do we fundamentally have the knowledge of where it lives within us, how it lives within us, these 6 forms of dysregulation, and how we interact with this really deep childhood physiology that's programmed into the nervous system. And then we take that, right, and we sit with our heart open and their heart open, and we have all the neurological components of the brain spotting online, and then that fundamental root level it
Right.
moves, right?
Well,
And that's, you've been through the training, and idea of a capsule, right? That comes from Robert Scare. For those of you that are studying trauma and these things, Dr. Robert Scare was a trauma neurologist. He worked in trauma rescuing for people on a neurological level for many years. Was a big fan. I had dinner with him just a little bit before he passed away. And his contributions. He wrote a book before Body Keeps the Score called The Body Bears the Burden. And he's got a whole series of books and wisdom there that comes from the neurological side. For those of you who are studying, one of the earliest books from one of my mentors I read was with my neural divergence. I hardly ever completed a book, but inside of that trauma spectrum, the trauma spectrum of viewing trauma stretched throughout time, of loading up the nervous system and the physiology of that. Well, he was a big fan of Brainspotting, and he had a quote in his writings about time capsules. And in that, in Brainspotting, we get access to these various capsules, and then we dump them out, right? It's like a small capsule, a small bubble that we just have to dump out the physiology wise. And he understood that, and he was a big fan of Brainspotting because he saw how it worked. But to get the deepest, and you've seen this, or I don't know if you saw my newest rendition of the capsule. Please remind me to send it to you.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But I was just going to say, this is, again, an aspect of working counter to the Western thinking.
That's right.
In the idea that the problem that someone comes into therapy with is about what's happening just purely in the right now, not that it's connected to what's happened before or further back, that many ways we're working with people's lifespan.
Yes.
But it's what's showing up in the now.
Absolutely. So in that, right? So in that, people are treating that crisis that we're talking about, whatever it is. If it's, they got in a car accident, they, work with veterans. I'm doing a radio show with some veterans, I think, in the next week or two here. And they treat the current symptom and manifestation, and they get that part out of the way, but then those individuals don't fully heal because the root physiology, going back to early childhood experiences, when you look at our veteran people, my dad is a veteran, he's a Vietnam veteran, well, that part healed, right? That part, all of those things healed, but his father died, right, at 9, when he was 9 years old. And that blocked our relationship, right? Because art was protected. And we talk about in Digging Roots, patterns of protection, patterns of protection. And then it harms the next generation. This is how developmental. So when you go from historical trauma to developmental trauma to the next generation, I worked with a highly published geneticist from Alaska, one of my actually my closest life friend, Gunnar Ebbison. His father has many publications, and this guy's was on genetics published beyond anywhere. That I had a conversation with him, and we sat in his living room up in Alaska, and we talked through how this all works on a genetic level, right? And at a genetic level, these things from historical trauma or even earlier epigenetic it's historical trauma, but we're talking, going back a long ways, is captured in the epigenetics. And inside of the epigenetics, part of this, right? He told me a couple of key points that I'll never forget. One is that it lives within us, going back to how it lives within us. But it doesn't, a genetic structure does not come alive, right, until it absolutely becomes survival necessity, right? So now the survival necessity comes alive. And for it to become current time, for it to bridge from historical trauma to now developmental trauma, to come alive as we're parenting our children, right, it has to have proven effective for you in childhood. And now it becomes, it's not just an epigenetics understructure. Now the genetics are awake, but then right, the next stage of that process is that it had to have effectiveness.
Right.
So it was effective. Now it becomes an awake genetic structure that's being transitioned and passed on now into your child. He told me it only takes one holding back, right? We say that, right? Generational trauma lives until one link in this chain. I do a lecture and I talk about this. There's a link in my Steve Sawyer resources section, my Steve Sawyer LCSW.net in the resource section where I talk about healing historical trauma to our Native community. It takes only one link in that chain to break it. And then it goes back to sleep. That epigenetics lives on, but it goes back to sleep. So, but we have to heal the developmental trauma. We have to heal our developmental trauma so that we don't pass it on to our children. I just gave my son a big, big heart-connected hug that I'd never had at that level, right? With heart-to-heart connection. We just dropped him off. He's a man now, and we dropped him off at Montana State University with his relatives over there. And in that, I can see it in him. That went to sleep, a heart-to-heart connection that I've been craving my whole life is there, right? And it takes one. For those of you out here who have generations of alcoholism, I've had that in my family, right? I had to break that chain. Both of my boys have vows, and from their heart, man, my son is over at Montana State seeing all this craziness going on. He's like, I want nothing to do with that. And it's asleep. The alcoholism is asleep in my sons. And it could be brought awake if we don't support him enough and surround him enough, right?
Because he's also going to be dealing with the peer pressure side of it too.
Oh, yeah.
Because again, nothing sits in isolation.
But when somebody sits when their truest, fullest sense of self, peer pressure has nothing on that. Right. My son's so strong in front of the face of all this because of me and his mother healing developmental trauma and within ourselves. And in that, man, the next generation can heal you all. You can heal now. The oldest guy at Brainspotted was an 88-year-old neuropsychiatrist. And I sat with him in a cabin in our wilderness program up in the north woods of Wisconsin, and the healing began there. It's never too late to heal the roots. We can do it even on our deathbed. And in that, we can start young too. So brain spotting, as you know, can be done with kids as young as 2 years old, right? Because we'd be very relational at that time. And so the digging roots model of brain spotting is a model that allows people to get the higher understanding of this is going on inside of me, map it all out, right? So we have the understanding from the frontal lobes of where we're going next. Then we got to build the bridge and the gap to the body. We bridge that gap to the body, and now the body has it. And now we can use brain spotting the other human sitting across from them with our heart without all the colonized mental health. I'm going to do this to you and you're going to feel better. We sit there and we heal it where it lives within at the root level.
Right, because the goal with that relationship is not hierarchical, power-driven, or control-driven.
That's right. And so inside of that, even the Digging Roots 1 takes us through all of that, but then the Digging Roots 2 now is how do we apply this to different mental health manifestations, like, eating disorders? How do we apply this to, people that have addiction or addiction stuff going on? And that, cut from the herd gets connection going again in that way. And that's the beauty of like being with your people. That's once you fracture some of this aloneness, you can fully connect with your people. And that's like things like the White Bison movement, these other recovery movements that are out there. You look at the ones that are focused from an Eastern philosophy, refuge recovery, and people sit and they meditate together, and they're with their people sitting it together in connectedness in a circle, meditating. You look at our cultural native traditions and how like white bison and some of these other recovery movements, Generation Red Road, Gene Thin Elk, and the relatives there are doing amazing work of building circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
All healing happens in a circle. For those of you that are mental health workers, psychiatrists, build the circle, right? All healing happens in a circle. That's old indigenous wisdom, right? And so,
well, and I just want to add to that standpoint too. It's one of the things that, as we've just been talking, west to east. I don't hear a lot of talking about north to south as well.
yes, well, there's all kinds of talk of that in the indigenous world.
But the indigenous world versus the, for lack of a better word, non-indigenous world, which is
no
much
borders,
more caught up in the.
Nobody owned anything. We just shared. You need some.
Right.
You need, here you go. Oh, you got the roots from over there. My family's 4 generations of abalone divers. On the West Coast, and unfortunately that's closed down right now. A lot of these environmental changes going on. My son at 9 years old harvested his. Here I didn't even know that my grandpa was the one who taught my dad how to do that. I didn't know that till just recently in a conversation with my dad. And it's not right. We take abalone shells to relatives, and then they trade stuff back. And in that sharing of all resources is where that competition that we're talking about earlier dies, right? Like when we share, and borders, fences, we're all coming from a state of fear. Protect my own, right? Keep my cattle in here. It's like just came out of South Dakota, and it's like, hey man, your horse is over here. It calls down to the buddy down the road, says your horse is over here. I'll bring them back to you. And so chase around and get that horse, and then take that horse down the road to their buddy down the road. No big deal. Hey, no problem. I'm sorry I ate some of your grass. Hopefully that wasn't for your horses.
Which comes back to, again, about building the relationships that are not about the hierarchical structure. One of the things that I know I'm also involved in is like horror gaming and things like Call of Cthulhu and such. And one of the things that I have just subtly been just noticing in the various adventure stories that get written, just how much it is about the most profound disconnection from other people and relationships that in many cases makes the horror both work, but also makes people susceptible.
Absolutely. So in that, right, there are organizations that are rising up that are from a higher knowing, right, of sharing how we're working together to heal, working together. You look, there's these movements of like Buffalo across the country, and sharing of Buffalo and the native communities is amazing, and watching this all come alive. And inside of that, one of my friends, they from the Yellowstone herd, a buffalo brought the buffalo back to the Menominee Reservation up in Wisconsin, and like what happened for that community to share like that, and they all showed up. And then you see their little manifestations of like, those are not, we don't do buffalo. But here my buddy discovered that those buffalo migrated right through that area, and there was all kinds of culture that came awake. Right now, there are people that are in stress response from all this trauma going on in the world, and there are other people that are becoming awake, right? And so that these organizations, so 2 organizations, I just had a deep call with Leah Denny from HIR Wellness. It's Healing Intergenerational Roots, a whole uncolonized mental health system over in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If they would open the doors for you to come in, visit, and go check it out. They have all these paintings on the wall. Oh my gosh, every time I go there, I go into tears, right? Just seeing all these paintings and how they have their clinic set up, and even how the structure of how the sessions work there, like for people to come in and just to have a place to be safe, to come out of stress response. And then they also are building, working with her on it. That's our collaboration. Then how do we get that deepest layer of healing with intergenerational roots? We just talked about this the other day. The National Wellbriety Movement and White Bison, Elder Don Coyas known him for 18 years. We finally figured out recently of like 12-step programs have saved thousands of lives, right? Thousands of lives. And people put it down and say it doesn't work, da 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 da. Well, go ahead and look at the statistics of how many lives they save. I have nothing on that, right?
Right.
In that, right? How do now we adapt and share with each other? And Don took the 12-step program and made it culturally responsive. Well, that's saving. It's one of the largest native recovery movements across the world. Got a call from Australia that the Aborigines are needing help down there, you know, and in that, like, so Kateri Koyas, who is Dawn's daughter, you know, Dawn stepping back, he's the elder, and Kateri's taken off with that and is like, hey, how does this become responsive to their community? Here's the teachings. We have the baseline teachings of how we did it here. You know, now you guys go do it down there. We'll give you the basic teachings and then adapt it, you know, to help your community with all these people that are showing up, Indigenous people that are showing up and needing addictions counseling. How do we do it from a culturally responsive, culturally honoring perspective? And now we translate it into their language, right? I'm working on a training I'm doing in Ecuador. Man, it's been a humble experience for me to learn. You know, I know a lot of people from South America, but then to learn about that community there and how digging roots applies there has been this whole journey of translation. We're working on it. Translation of the slides. You know, actually, I'm a little bit behind. I got to get on my slides. But in that, you know, translation into their language and then space. I don't come in there as some, it's like, that's how we always invite the table to be open. Like anybody else have anything they want to share about this, you know, and in that, they're, you know, adapting, digging roots, even give the baseline teachings of getting access to early childhood physiology and then adapt with it, you know, and that's how David has been with Brainspotting, you know, and has that higher knowing in Brainspotting, but then people start to because they're Western mind, they're trying to capitalize on it. They're trying to do fancy things. They're throwing everything into it under the sun, but it's not, it's losing that foundational kind of why it works, right?
Well, it stops being, because as I said, what you just described there was North and South knowledge talking, going back and forth. Yes. And again, this middle place that's influenced from the Western direction into the East and South is caught up in that standpoint of the control, the authorization, the hierarchy, and the standpoint of then the commodification. Because even one of the other problems that we're having even within Western aspects is that there are holes that are functioning for a reason, and having certain, and I live in Silicon Valley, tech bros feel like, oh, we can fill this hole. No, that hole is there for a reason.
Exactly. And in that, like, right, you can only build a house off of its foundation. And now that's in cultural teachings, you know, spiritual teaching, everything, right? It's like, that's why the elders, right, pass this on. And you have, and man, your whole ego, your whole persona wants to do it even better somehow, right? But that comes, this ego response we were talking about earlier, you know, and even, you know, so inside of that, honoring the initial wisdom, right? Honoring the initial wisdom that created what you stepped into, you know? And to step into a place of we say wopila, of thank you, and then I will protect this thing for you that you created, to protect in its purity, in the simplicity, right? The frontal lobes in the human brain want to make things way complex and overthink, right? And that's that long journey that I was sharing about early, from the head to the heart, right? And in that, you know, to come from that heart wisdom of what gifted you, whatever it is, if it's your clinical model, whatever that is. And so, like a discipline, having a discipline of thank you keeps our ego in check,
Right.
And sometimes we don't get to do it right then and there. It's best if we can to say thank you right then and there in someone every way. And our thank you should hurt because they gave us a big gift, right? So for David, man, brain spotting hurts a little bit because I'm blessed, man. I had this elder who our wilderness program hosted 4 of his intensives. That was hard work. My family had to give up time with me, 5 days of straight immersion with the man, the myth, the legend, right? And in that, like, then to learn it in its incredible finesse and wisdom. And then, David was a part of my own, when I died in a snowmobile accident, came back, David, I knew, and that's what the brain spotting training model of knowing it in the inside of us, right? What he was doing with me, and then go and pass it on to other people. And so for people that are learning brain spotting right now, that they're just trying to throw all these other things into it, versus going back to that post I sent you, emailed it to you, of the foundations. What are the foundational concepts of brain spotting? And then from there, we can adapt. But we have to have the foundation of the house. And then the foundation of the house, then we can build upon it with our higher wisdom, training, understanding, whatever it is. But learn it at its foundational level. Don't start mixing. Don't start throwing all kinds of other neurophysiology messages that you don't even realize, right?
Yeah.
So
So another way to put this, and this is something I said to a client a while ago, and I think he could be considered a millennial. And we were talking about, we were talking about a jerk chicken recipe. And he felt that he should be able to make whatever he wanted with this jerk chicken recipe, and it would taste wonderful. I said, no, you need to learn the recipe first.
Yes.
And have the consistency of what the recipe is showing. Then you can start flying and adding everything else
from there. Yeah.
But how it's working, and you can be successful there by knowing the recipe first, because you've got consistency and it's set up for you to.
That's the roots of the jerk recipe, right? To know it from its oldest tradition and know exactly that combination from learning it through the elders that were past that generational knowledge, to know how to take that jerk and make it perfect as it was. Right?
And then to add that flair, like you're going to add miso from Japan to this.
Yes.
Whatever else fusion you want to do, but how to get that consistency going.
I was with one of my buddies, and I don't know where I just came from one of my buddies in North Dakota, and he cooked some buffalo on the grill, and man, right? Food is medicine. Like, it was like, when I ate it, I was like, what, how and now here's another thing that goes from our Western world. Instead of just enjoying it in the moment and experiencing it in its beauty of his recipe, that I have no idea where the wisdom came from with that, right? But inside of it, to stop and not have to take, right, the recipe. That would have been me not enjoying the moment with him. I got wherever that knowledge came from, with the way he made that buffalo on the grill, in that moment, to enjoy the moment of what he was giving me. This is what's going on in so many ways, right? Just experience the foundation of what you've been given and experience it in a moment. Stay out of your stress response in that moment, right? The Eastern people, right? The Eastern wisdom, right? Of being in the here and now, right? That's not just Eastern. That's at the foundation of everything. But that's what starts to counter this stress response that everybody's living in. To be right here, right now, and be with experience whatever it is that's in front of you right now as a gift, right? They talk about in recovery programs, right? Grateful people, having a grateful heart. HeartMap's technique, the quick awareness technique that you can go right on YouTube, as long as it's from the institute that has the foundational teachings. If it came from the Institute of the science and all that's with that, right? First you connect, right? You connect to yourself and you notice your breath. Then You go to your heart, your chante, your heart. And then you sit with your heart and you settle down. And now I can go out and connect to others. And in that, the last stage is gratitude or appreciation. Activate gratitude or appreciation in your heart. And you can feel it. You can feel the connection to that relationship. A lot of times it's my kids, or maybe it's my dog, or whatever it is in that moment, whatever it is for me in that moment. And then it just brings this peace to the nervous system. What they have there is so simple. 3 steps, quick coherence. It's called quick for a reason. You can de-stress yourself within seconds. And we'll make sure we get some of these resources out to you. And for those of you that are clinicians and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback back to this training I was involved with Dan Siegel and the Gottmans. They did the relational component. Dan Siegel did some mindfulness elements of the process, but the Resilient Heart Program, trauma certification program from HeartMath. Geez, my team just told me the other day here, they had it on sale for like $100. The whole course, 16 hours. And it's all online video. It's video, has the foundational teachings of HeartMath, and then all of us that spun off from that. And I went off in there on the developmental trauma understanding and how we can, regulate ourselves with that, and how HeartMath helps with that. There were some other clicians involved too, that were just absolutely brilliant minds and people. $100 to watch online. And the foundational part of it is good for everybody to watch. And advanced clinical application in that for the mental health workers or people that are out there doing that work. Then I was a part of writing the HeartMath interventions program, which a lot of the case studies in there were my clients, and also the heart rate variation tests. I use a lot of those in my lectures because I captured post-traumatic stress in the nervous system on the measurement technology to show people what's going on inside of their body,
So I think this is also a great place for us to wrap up and so forth, but I'll share one of those little anecdotal things. And this is also a plug, unintentional plug for the Aura Ring, which is one of the ones that's measuring and so forth. So I had a client who came in, clear developmental trauma, when I was using a bunch of both brain spotting as well as some developmental DVT with him. And one of the things that they told me before they left was, after they had been tracking based off of that Aura Ring, what was showing up based off of, I think, the heart system.
Yeah.
She said that when she came in, her reading was somewhere around 9. And that after certain sessions we had, it started to climb up. Now that 9 she was having, she said it's something like 13 is associated with an 90-year-old invalid stuck in bed.
Wow. Yeah.
So she went from 9, she was about 30 when I last saw her. Doing these things.
Well, in brain spotting, right, we teach, most people are capable of doing the activation model, right, which is turning towards your pain and sitting with somebody with it, right? There are populations that need an adapted approach. But a lot, in that, right, her nervous system was coming up. It was access. It started at a 9, but then she was getting access, right, to her roots. And for those of you that are out there and you're healing, you're in your therapy, and you're starting to get more access, it sometimes hurts more before it gets better. That's when the medicine in there reveals itself. And
by the end of it, she told me that she had gone rock climbing or indoor rock climbing, and she said, actually, climbing the wall here was more frightening than actually what we were doing in the session.
Yeah.
And she was reconnecting with her life to find a new level of being.
Isn't that beautiful? I remember a lady that was in one of our trainings that left from the training and went to her childhood home, and that was her. Then she found this log in the woods that she sat on with her mom. And there'd be conflict in the household, and then they would go out, and this is that accessing that healing within, that resilience within of the trauma moment. And they would sit out there and look at the stars and listen to the frogs singing. Boy, those frogs were singing, and she just found a different layer of calm, right? Like a different layer of calm. And so in that, healing is possible, and it lives within you. Hopefully, I hope for anybody who listens to this that you find, right, the resilience that lurks next to your trauma, that you as clinicians find working from your heart, right? To truly work from your heart. And I'm telling you now that brain spotting and the way we train it experientially and cognitively, when people get it, and there's people that don't get it when they go through the training for a while or never get it, but the ones that do find it, most people in the trainings find it, especially when it's trained in person. Then to sit with your client and then give them that gift to find, right, the resilience that lurks within them. And that's anxiety response about a job to whatever it is that calming lives inside of them, and it just has to be brought to life. Bessel had a quote, and I use it a lot, which is that our primary job in working with people with trauma is to have them have a safe experience with their own body, and we have to that's in brain spotting. We help hold that space for them to get there.
So where can people find you or some of the other resources you mentioned so they can continue this work too?
You betcha. So, just be patient with us because it's moving fast and the website is always changing. The Developmental Trauma Training Institute.com. And inside of that, we have a network of providers that is wrapping up right now of people that have been through all the trainings of digging roots since COVID, because before COVID, it was a much shorter training and it's not the same training anymore. In that, we have providers and working on some other healing stories. We are gathering people's healing journey. However you got there, that is something to share with somebody else. When we hear somebody else's story, I'm working on this website, Hope Shot, that is, people sharing their story, however it is, so that when somebody goes in there and click, they COVID and whatever their story, they might find a story about COVID that shatters their aloneness. That somebody else out there in the universe experienced this. If you're a veteran, if you're and I'm working on that one right now. It's kind of my big project I'm working on, and Developmental Trauma Training Institute.com. But inside of there's writings about addiction and how developmental trauma, the question and answer section and stuff like that. We have a provider network of people that are trained at this deep fundamental roots level. And in that, different layers of that training and identifying what that looks like, even healing intensives, and that from a developmental trauma and roots level perspective. And then I have a lot of resources for various communities on Steve Sawyer, LCSW.net. And in there's writings, there's the resource section is filled with podcasts. One of Perry's is on there. One I did with White Bison there, and the historical trauma healing, that's in the resource sections. You can go and click that. It doesn't cost anything. Just go in there and listen and hear maybe some of your story that can guide you on your healing journey.
All righty. So we'll try to have as many of those in the show notes as we can. But otherwise, Steve, thank you for coming back for a second round of talking about this. And
and a good round it was. It was almost like we were it's like a 3-round MMA fight. We went into it. I'm really grateful, Perry, for you inviting me to have this beautiful conversation with you and all that came up within it about the mental health system, our world around us now. And I really look forward to round 3, whenever that comes.
And the stuff that we're right now struggling with does not sit in isolation from each other. No. Everything is connection.
Everything is in connection and in organizations and all of that, and in the Lakota language, you have this word matankiase, which is all my relations. That's how we close. We say all my relations. Matankiase, we're all connected. All the things, the animal, everything, all the world, when we say that word, is connected as one. And that's old knowledge, to understand that and be connected at that level for all of us out there. So with that, I would say to you, Perry, matankiase.
And I would say this, and translated from Quajon and Star Trek Discovery, may we have 1,000 partings, so we have 1,000 more meetings.
Yeah, till next time.
Till next time.
We'll talk again soon.
So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back for more podcasts. As I should also say, this also represents my 3-year anniversary of doing this podcast. So thank you for being here for all those 3 years and listening to this as well. So stay tuned.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.